Wood cannot burn. Wood actually cannot catch on fire. So physical matter exists in three states. The first state would be a solid, like my desk. The second state would be a liquid, like water, liquid water, glass of water. And the third state would be a gas, like think of propane or natural gas. Now, did you know that the only physical state in which a material can burn is when it's in its gaseous state? So wood is a solid. Wood cannot actually burn. So when we have a campfire or a house fire, structure fire, what is actually burning? You're like, I'm pretty sure I've seen wood burn in my campfire. So what is actually taking place is there is a chemical change happening to the wood before it ignites. That chemical change happens due to the application of heat. Now, if we think of the fire triangle, and we've talked about this before, fire triangle consists of a fuel source, an oxygen source, and a heat source. What is actually happening is that wood, when it is exposed to a heat source, it starts to break down, and the technical term is pyrolysis. It starts to pyrolysis, which means it starts to turn from a solid directly into a gas. And it's actually that gas that can then catch on fire. Try this next time you have a match or a candle. If you strike a match, or if you look really closely at a candle flame, you'll actually see that that flame is not burning the wick, or that flame is not actually burning the match. It's actually burning right above where that solid wick is, or where that solid, cardboard or wood match is. And that's because it's not actually the match that's burning. It's not actually the candle wick that's burning. What is burning is the gas that is coming off of that matchstick as it heats up and pyrolyzes into a gas. So without relegating this just to nerd to know firefighting jargon, what is the practical benefit of this? Well, firefighters, when we go to put out a fire, how we choose to extinguish that fire depends on this principle that only gases can burn. Let's talk about a few different materials, for example. So we talked about wood. Wood, in its solid state, it can't burn. It has to be heated up first, which then causes it to break down, chemically change, release a gas, and then that gas can burn, right? Now, what if we take gasoline, what we put in our cars? So gasoline, it actually releases flammable vapors on its own at room temperature that are ignitable. That's what makes gasoline so flammable and can be so dangerous, right? If you take a flammable liquid, but let's say diesel fuel, diesel actually doesn't produce flammable vapors at room temperature. So the temperature at which different materials produce the vapors, the gaseous vapors required to combust, is what affects how dangerous they are to firefighters and how quickly a fire will spread. So wood obviously does not produce flammable vapors at room temperature. Wood needs to be superheated before it releases enough of that gas, before it pyrolyzes enough to produce those gas vapors. Diesel fuel only needs to be exposed to a small amount of heat before it is combustible, and something like gasoline doesn't need to be exposed to any external heat, and it can be ignited right at room temperature from the gaseous fumes it's producing. Same with something like natural gas. In my house, we have a natural gas stove. Those natural gas vapors, they're ignitable at room temperature. So when it comes to practical firefighting, when it comes to us extinguishing a fire, how is this applied? It's applied in two ways. When we apply water to a fire, we've talked about this, that we are cooling that material down so that the ignition process cannot continue. What we are actually doing, let's say if I spray my fire hose on a piece of wood that's burning, let's say we've got a structure that's on fire, or even something like a bonfire, what I'm doing is I'm actually cooling the temperature of that wood lower than its pyrolysis temperature, so it is no longer producing gaseous vapors that are then combustible. Once the material is no longer producing combustible vapors, the fire goes out. Now, what about a material such as gasoline, liquid gasoline, that produces flammable vapors at room temperature? If I just simply apply water to that, am I cooling it enough to reduce those flammable vapors? The answer is no, which means how we extinguish a gasoline fire is different than how we extinguish a wood fire or any sort of natural material fire. So how do we extinguish a gasoline fire? Well, that is where firefighters use a special firefighting foam to cut off the oxygen supply from that fire. We're going to get into firefighting foam in our next video. So what I'd like you to do, if you found this interesting, is hit subscribe. We are a small YouTube channel and we're going to get lost in the algorithm if you don't subscribe. So subscribe and come back next time. In a couple of days, we're going to have another video where we are specifically talking about firefighting foam. There's two main types of firefighting foam that we use on very different fires. We're going to get into it next time. Thanks.